Daughter-in-law's voice carried across the entire restaurant when she said it, loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear, loud enough that the waiter stopped mid-pour and pretended he hadn't. "Dad, you really don't need to be here for this part. The business discussion is going to go way over your head. 71 years old and my son's wife just dismissed me like I was a child who'd wandered into the wrong room. 63 guests at my son's partnership celebration dinner, and the man who had quietly paid off every debt that made this moment possible was being asked, politely but unmistakably, to go wait somewhere else. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the law firm my son was just named partner at had almost dissolved completely 18 months ago. And the $340,000 that kept it alive had come from a savings account in my name. I didn't say a word. I just picked up my water glass, took a slow sip, and watched her smile at the table like she'd just handled something gracefully. This is the story of what happened next. And I want to tell it right, because it's not really about revenge. It's about what people reveal when they think you're not important enough to be careful around. My name is Lawson. I'm 71, retired after 34 years as a senior electrical engineer with the Army Corps of Engineers. I drove the same truck for 12 years. I iron my own shirts. I eat lunch at the same diner 3 days a week because the coffee is decent, and the owner, a woman named Helen, knew my late wife Gloria by name and always asks how I'm doing. Gloria died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Caught at stage 3, fought for 2 years. She was the kind of woman who made everyone in a room feel more at ease just by being in it. She was a retired high school principal. She read actual books, the kind with spines and no screens. She could silence a room full of teenagers with one look and comfort a grieving parent with the same breath. After she died, I had her life insurance payout, the proceeds from a second property we'd rented out for 20 years, and my pension. Between everything, I was comfortable, not wealthy by any definition my daughter-in-law would recognize, but comfortable. And after 40 years of living carefully, I had savings that most people my age would consider substantial. My son, Derek, is 42. He's a good man, mostly. Smart, dedicated, the kind of lawyer who actually returns phone calls. He met Vivienne 8 years ago at a charity fundraiser. She came from what people politely call an established family. Her father was a developer. Her mother sat on 3 non-profit boards. They were used to a certain kind of lifestyle. Derek adapted to it faster than I expected. I tried not to hold that against anyone. The problem started small, the way they always do. Vivienne began referring to Gloria's furniture as vintage, in a tone that meant the opposite. She suggested Derek and I have our regular Sunday calls instead of Sunday lunches, because the drive to my house was a lot. She once asked me, at a holiday dinner, whether I'd considered moving somewhere with more activities for seniors. I'm 71. I hike 4 miles 3 times a week, but the real shift came 18 months ago, when Derek's firm hit a wall. 2 senior partners had retired within 6 months of each other. The firm had taken on an expansion they couldn't quite support. Their credit line was maxed. Derek called me on a Thursday night, and he didn't ask for money. That was the thing about Derek. He never would have asked, but I could hear it underneath everything he was saying. He was scared, genuinely scared in a way I hadn't heard from him since he was 15 and thought he'd failed his driving test. "How much do you need to stabilize it?" I asked him. "Dad, I'm not asking you to—" "Derek, how much?" He told me the number. I told him I'd have it transferred by Monday. He asked me 3 times if I was sure. I was sure. Gloria and I had talked about what we'd do with the money if anything happened to one of us. We'd agreed, family first, then the rest. This was family. This was our son. This was 30 years of him working towards something. The transfer went through on a Tuesday. Lawson W. Crawford. Personal savings, $340,000. I asked Derek to keep it between us, not because I wanted anything from it, but because I knew Vivienne would find a way to make it complicated. And I didn't want complicated. I wanted my son's firm to survive. He agreed, and he kept his word, which matters more than people might think. The firm survived. Better than survived. Oh, the following year it grew. They brought on 2 new associates. They landed a major commercial real estate client. Derek was offered a full partnership, the youngest in the firm's history. Vivienne started telling the story at dinner parties, the story of how Derek had steadied the ship through a rough patch through sheer determination and leadership. She wasn't wrong about Derek's part, she just didn't know about mine. The partnership dinner was Vivienne's production from start to finish. She chose the restaurant, a private dining room at a downtown club that required a membership just to enter. She designed the guest list. She arranged the seating chart. She had a florist come in. There were calligraphy place cards. I found out about it from Derek, who called me 3 days before and said, "Dad, Vivienne's putting this dinner together. I really want you there." "Of course," I said. I wore my good blazer. Of course. Dark navy. Bought it 6 years ago for a nephew's wedding. I got my hair cut the day before. I drove 45 minutes and I got there early because I'm my father's son, and my father believed the only time you were ever late was when you were dead. The valet took my truck without making a face, which I appreciated. Inside, the room was already filling up. Derek's law partners, Vivienne's parents, George and Sylvia, who shook my hand with the kind of warmth that implies they're doing you a favor. Several clients I recognized from photos Derek had sent me over the years. A few people I didn't know at all who seemed to know each other very well. I found my place card. Table 3. Not the head table which seated Derek and Vivienne and the senior partners. Not Table 1, which had the firm's largest clients. Table 3 was against the far wall, near the kitchen entry. My seat faced away from the podium. I sat down and introduced myself to the people nearby. A young associate named Timothy and his girlfriend, an older couple who turned out to be Vivienne's aunt and uncle from Connecticut, lovely people who asked thoughtful questions and listened when I answered. I was fine. Then the business discussion began. Derek's senior partner, a man named Hargrove, stood up to talk about the firm's trajectory, growth projections, strategic priorities, new practice areas. He was mid-sentence when Vivienne leaned across the table toward me. She'd come over from the head table specifically to do this, I realized later, and said what she said. "Dad, you really don't need to be here for this part. The business discussion is going to go way over your head. Not a whisper, not an aside, clear and bright as a bell. Why don't you head to the bar area and get comfortable? We'll all be together for dessert." Timothy, the young associate, went very still beside me. Vivienne's aunt reached for her water glass and looked at the table. The waiter, who had been mid-pour, completed his pour very slowly without looking up. I looked at Vivienne. She was smiling. She meant it kindly, I think. That's almost the worst part. She genuinely believed she was doing me a favor, protecting me from boredom, managing a situation. She had decided somewhere along the way that I was a sweet, simple man who fixed things around his house and ate early dinners and needed to be gently redirected away from adult conversations. "I think I'll stay," I said, "but thank you." A small flicker crossed her face, then the smile returned broader. "Of course, whatever you're comfortable with." She went back to the head table. I sat there while Hargrove talked about strategic growth, and I listened carefully to every word, because 34 years of engineering projects had taught me that the most important information is almost always delivered in the language other people assume you don't understand. Hargrove mentioned the 18 months prior as the firm's proving ground. He talked about how Derek's leadership had demonstrated real character under pressure. He talked about the private investment that had allowed them to bridge the gap. He called it a significant show of faith from someone who believed in this firm's future. And he looked briefly at the head table. Derek caught my eye from across the room. He gave me a small nod. Hargrove didn't say my name. That had been my preference. But he knew. A few of the senior partners knew. The room did not. The dinner continued. The food was genuinely good. I had a conversation with Vivienne's father, George, who turned out to be far more interesting than I'd given him credit for. He'd done 2 years of construction work before going into development, and we talked for 20 minutes about soil composition and load-bearing calculations. Vivienne watched this from across the room with an expression I couldn't quite read. Dessert arrived. Derek stood to give remarks. He talked about the firm. He thanked his partners. He thanked the staff. He thanked the clients. He said things about hard work and opportunity that were true and deserved. Then he paused in a way that I recognized. The pause he's had since he was a teenager when he's deciding whether to say the harder thing. He said the harder thing. There's someone in this room who I owe a debt that I can't adequately express in a business setting, Derek said. Someone who made a decision 18 months ago that most people never would have made. Not because they expected anything in return, not because they had to, but because that's the kind of person they are. The room was quiet. Vivienne's expression shifted. My father, Derek said, transferred $340,000 from his personal savings into this firm when we were at our lowest point. He asked for nothing. He told me to keep it quiet because he didn't want the attention. He's been sitting at table 3 tonight being redirected away from conversations about the business he literally saved. The silence that followed was not dramatic. It was heavy in a particular way, the way a room gets quiet when something true and uncomfortable has just been said aloud. Timothy, the young associate, turned to look at me. So did the Connecticut aunt. So did the Hargrove. So did eventually everyone. Vivienne had gone the specific color of someone who has just understood something they cannot ununderstand. George, her father, set down his dessert fork. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise a glass. I just looked at Derek and gave him the same small nod he'd given me earlier. I didn't want to make a scene, Derek continued, his voice steadier than I expected. And honestly, I'm making one right now, and I'm okay with that. Because I think sometimes the people who do the most for us are exactly the people we forget to see clearly. He raised his glass. To my father, the quietest person in the room, who has never once needed anyone to know how much he was worth. The room raised their glasses. Vivienne did not raise hers immediately. I watched her do the calculation, the social one, the one about how this looked, what came next, who was watching. And then she raised it. I appreciated that she did. Eventually. What happened after that was less dramatic and more human, which is how the real consequences of things tend to work. George pulled me aside after dessert while people were milling around with coffee. He's a large man, George, the kind who takes up space physically and financially, and generally assumes both are fine. He shook my hand the way men shake hands when they've just discovered they've been wrong about something. Lawson, he said, I owe you a real conversation. You don't owe me anything, I said. I think I do. Vivienne. He stopped. Started end. She has a way of categorizing people. It's something she learned somewhere. I'm not sure where. Her mother and I have tried to address it. He looked across the room at his daughter. Tonight was not her finest hour. She loves her husband, I said. I can see that clearly. The rest is something she'll figure out. He looked at me for a moment. Gloria raised a good son, he said, and she had a good partner. That one caught me off guard, I'll admit. Vivienne found me by the coat check. The room had thinned out. She was still in her event posture, spine straight, expression controlled. But something underneath it had changed. I owe you an apology, she said. You don't have to. I do. She said it firmly, which I respected. What I said to you at the table was condescending, and it was wrong. I've been... She paused. I've had an idea of you in my head that I built without really looking at who you actually are. That's on me. I looked at this woman, 40 years old, clearly uncomfortable, clearly doing the right thing anyway. Vivienne, I said. I know you love Derek. I know you want good things for him. So do I. That's the whole foundation right there. Everything else we can figure out. She nodded. Her eyes were bright in the way that means someone is not going to cry but is close to it. I'd like to start over, she said, if that's something you'd be open to. I'm open to it, I said. And I meant it. The week after the dinner, Hargrove called me directly. He wanted to have lunch. We met at a place he suggested, a steakhouse downtown, and he spent the first 10 minutes being very smooth and professional, the way senior partners are, and then he dropped it. We'd like to formalize your investment, he said. Convert it to a structured equity stake. You'd receive quarterly distributions. Given the firm's current trajectory, we're projecting Hargrove, I said. I appreciate the offer. I don't want equity in my son's law firm. He looked at me over his water glass. I want my son to know he built something himself, I said. The money was a bridge, not a stake. It's already served its purpose. He was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, in 30 years of practice, I don't think I've met many people who think about money the way you do. I had a good teacher, I said. Her name was Gloria. Timothy, the young associate from Table 3, sent me a handwritten note the following week. He said the dinner had changed something for him, the way he thought about the people in rooms he entered. He said he'd been in professional settings for 6 years and had never seen anything quite like that moment. He asked if I'd be willing to have coffee sometime and talk about the Corps of Engineers because he was considering a career change. We had that coffee. Then another one. He's a smart young man who asks good questions and doesn't pretend to know things he doesn't know, which is rarer than it sounds. Vivienne's mother, Sylvia, called me 3 weeks after the dinner. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to come to Sunday dinner, not a formal thing, just family. She said Vivienne had been doing a lot of thinking, and she hoped I'd give them all a chance to do better. I went to Sunday dinner. It was slightly awkward for the first 40 minutes, the way new things usually are. Then Vivienne's youngest brother came in from a baseball practice with mud on his cleats, and everyone got distracted, and something loosened in the room, and by the time dessert came around, it was just people talking. That was enough. That was actually a lot. The thing I keep coming back to is not the dinner. It's not the money, or the moment, or the look on Vivienne's face when she understood what she hadn't seen. It's something Gloria told me a few weeks before she died, when we were having one of those conversations that happen at the end of things, when people finally say what they've been meaning to say. She said, Lawson, the problem with quiet people is that everyone assumes they're simple, and quiet people let them because they've learned that proving yourself is exhausting and most of the time not worth it. She squeezed my hand. But sometimes it's worth it. You'll know when. I thought about her the moment I decided to stay at that table. When Vivienne smiled and invited me to wait by the bar, when I said, quietly, that I thought I'd stay. Gloria would not have wanted a scene. She wouldn't have wanted a speech or a dramatic reveal or anyone's humiliation. She would have wanted something true to come out of something small, the way it did. She would have wanted Derek to say the hard thing and mean it. She would have wanted Vivienne to look someone in the eye and apologize with her spine still straight. She would have wanted Sunday dinner to become a regular thing. We're working on that. If you've watched this far wherever you are, I want to say something that isn't about revenge or satisfying outcomes or getting what you deserve. I want to say that the people you overlook are always more than what you see. The retired engineer at Table 3, the janitor mopping the floor, the woman who raised 4 children and somehow also ran a school for 30 years, the man who ironed his own shirt and drove 45 minutes and arrived early because that's what his father taught him. Everyone in every room has a story you haven't heard yet. Try to remember that before you redirect someone to the bar. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe, and I'd love to know where you're watching from, because every single week, people from places I'd never expect are sitting with these stories, and that means something to me. It really does. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened that night. Not the dinner itself, not the moment Derek stood up and said what he said, but everything that led to it. The years of small dismissals, the Sunday lunches that became phone calls, the place card at Table 3 facing away from the podium. None of those things were accidents. They were a pattern, and patterns don't lie. What I've come to understand is that the way people treat you when they think nothing is at stake is the truest information you'll ever get about them. Vivienne didn't dismiss me at that table because she was having a bad night. She did it because it had never once occurred to her that she should do otherwise. That's not cruelty. That's something quieter and in some ways harder to address. It's a habit of mind, the kind that forms when a person has never had to reckon with being wrong about another human being. The thing about habits is that they can be broken. I've watched it happen. I watched it happen with Vivienne, standing at the coat check with her spine straight and her eyes bright, saying the words she didn't have to say. That took something. I don't want to minimize it. Saying, "I was wrong about you," to someone you've underestimated for years is genuinely difficult, and she did it without excuses. That's what I mean when I talk about character. Not the absence of mistakes, the capacity to face them. Derek made a choice that night that I didn't ask him to make and couldn't have predicted. He chose truth over comfort in a room full of people whose opinions mattered to his career. That's the kind of decision that reveals what a person is actually made of. Not what they say they believe, but what they do when it costs them something. I think about Gloria raising him, all those years of her modeling. Exactly that. Saying the harder thing, holding the line, never letting the easier path become the habit. It showed up in him at the exact moment it needed to. The money was never the point. I need to be clear about that. The $340,000 I transferred into that firm was never leverage, never a card I planned to play. If Derek had never said a word about it publicly, I would have been at peace with that. What mattered was that my son had something worth saving, and I was in a position to help save it. That's not generosity in any grand sense. That's just what you do for the people you love. What I didn't plan for was what the truth would do once it was in the room. How it would shift things. How it would give Vivienne a chance to become someone slightly different than who she'd been. How it would give her father and me 20 minutes of real conversation. How it would give a young associate named Timothy a reason to think differently about the rooms he walks into. None of that was the goal. All of it was the result. I think that's how it usually works. You do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because you've mapped out the consequences. And then the consequences unfold in directions you never anticipated. And some of them are good, and some of them are hard, and most of them are both at once. That's not fate. That's not the universe rewarding you. That's just people responding to honesty when they finally encounter it. Gloria told me once that the longest projects are always the most worthwhile. She was talking about teaching, about the students who pushed back for 3 years and then came back at 30 to say something changed. But she meant it more broadly than that. She always did. I think she'd recognize what's happened since that dinner. Sunday dinners becoming a regular thing, Timothy asking good questions over coffee, Vivienne learning to look more carefully at the people in the rooms she enters. Small things, slow things. The kind of things that don't make for a dramatic story but make for a decent life. That's what I'm after. That's all I've ever been after.